I'd like to introduce Jane Andrews, President of the League of Women Voters of San Diego.
Thank you, Jean. It's a delight to have you all here, and I want to welcome you on behalf of both the League of Women Voters of San Diego and the League of Women Voters of North County, San Diego. This webinar is a joint effort of both leagues. Before we begin, I do want to highlight that there are many events and activities of both leagues in the coming months. This is an important election year, so please have a look at our websites. These will be posted in the chat. I also want to make note that we are going to have a follow-up webinar on the subject of housing 2 weeks from tonight on Wednesday, March 11th at 5:30, not 6. It's going to be entitled New in Town Factory-Built Housing, and it's going to help explain to us alternatives to traditional housing production process. So before we begin, I just want to remind everyone that the League is a nonpartisan grassroots organization. We do not support or oppose a candidate or a political party. But we do hold elected officials accountable, and we advocate on issues that have been carefully considered by our local as well as national leadership. So I want to remind people to be sure to put questions in the Q&A. We will have our presentation, but it will be followed by a question and answer period. And Wendy Young, who is the LWVSD events chair, and I will be alternating picking questions. So I am delighted to turn our webinar now over to Mary Thompson, Myles Pomeroy, and Ann Omsted, who are stalwart members of our Joint Housing Committee. We're excited to hear what you have to say.
Well, thank you, Anne, or Jane, excuse me, and welcome everyone, and thank you for your interest in affordable housing. Joining me in presenting this program are Myles Pomeroy and Ann Omsted. We are members of the San Diego and North County San Diego League of Women Voters. We share leadership roles in the League's Regional Housing and Homelessness Interest Group. This group has authored the League's Regional Housing Action Policy and Homelessness Action Policy. We hope this presentation will stimulate your interest in becoming more involved in the League's Housing and Homelessness Interest Group, fondly known as H&H. This presentation will take about 45 minutes, leaving time for your questions at the end. All slides will be available on both Leagues' websites, so don't worry about taking notes. There's no simple explanation for the housing challenges faced in the San Diego region and other major metropolitan areas in California and the U.S., where the cost of housing has climbed steeply, especially during the past 5 years. The high cost of housing touches every aspect of life in our community. It is one of the root causes of homelessness and has made it difficult for many residents to afford and meet basic needs such as food, utilities, childcare, healthcare, and transportation. Our focus is on addressing the very real housing needs and challenges of lower-income households. This presentation identifies key elements affecting housing affordability, equity, and the roles government policy and private entities play. The League of Women Voters fosters productive conversations around these themes and supports policies to promote affordable housing for all in our region. Oops. Here's the agenda of what we're going to cover in the next 45 minutes or so in this presentation. We will outline the key factors in the affordable housing story. We'll dig into affordability, how affordable housing for lower income households is created, funded, and built, and policies that can help markets work again. Our goal is to offer a framework to give you the tools to better understand the devilish details of this complex subject. Throughout the presentation, you'll see signs of what's called the 5 P's of affordable housing: producing affordable housing, preserving affordable housing, protecting tenants, preventing displacement, and promoting equity, inclusion, and sustainability. Our focus will be on the first 2, producing and preserving affordable housing. And as mentioned, as your questions come to mind, please add them to the Q&A function, and we'll do our best to respond at the end. The simple response to any shortage is this: when demand is great, supply more. Unfortunately, the law of supply and demand should work eventually, except when it doesn't. Your idea of an affordable home might be an apartment or a house set in a well-planned city within your budget while still paying for all the other necessities. For many, that seems like an unattainable dream. The high cost of housing affects the whole community, making it hard for school districts to recruit teachers, fire departments to hire firefighters, and service workers like hotel employees, gardeners, cleaning staff, etc., to find housing that doesn't require over 50% of their monthly income, leaving little or no money for food, healthcare, and other necessities. Some people move out of state in search of affordability, while others double or triple up, live in substandard housing, or have to work 2 or 3 jobs. Housing affordability is complicated. We'll look at the number of issues related to planning, developing, funding, and creating and preserving affordable housing, and the roles played by many levels of government and private industry. Many of the big things that would address supply are going in the wrong direction. Cost factors of land, material, labor, and money are usually cited as what's making housing unaffordable. The cost of land. When demand for housing is high, as it is in San Diego, when zoning is changed to increase allowable density, that can cause land values to increase because more housing units can now be built on the site. The increased value can lead to higher cost for renters or buyers. The cost of money. 30-year fixed mortgage rates have increased significantly, almost doubling from 3.6% in 2020 to 6.24% in 2025. The cost of building materials, steel, lumber, concrete, copper, glass, and plastics that go into home construction have been rising for years and up until now have been subject to tariffs. The cost of labor. Many construction jobs were being done by undocumented workers who are now being deported. In most of the state's major urban areas, the bulk of a single-family house's price is locked into the land it sits on. Not only does this make new housing more expensive, but it also influences what kind of housing gets produced. Developers prioritize high-end projects since even the cheapest prefab unit will come stuck with a steep fixed construction cost. According to the San Diego Housing Commission's April 2025 study, the average price of land for apartments, multifamily projects was $8.2 million per acre. In a 2025 RAND Corporation study, The High Cost of Producing Multifamily Housing in California, the authors concluded that understanding key cost factors is a requirement for developing housing policy reforms that can directly contribute to increased affordability. That study compared housing policies between Texas, California, and Colorado. Of note, the study found San Diego has the lowest overall costs. In Texas and Colorado are much lower than California. Affordable housing should be available in all communities with access to education, jobs, infrastructure, and services. The effects of historic racial and income segregation through zoning still exist. Planning to create and preserve affordable housing must address these factors. California's fair housing laws require cities and counties to affirmatively act to address inequalities in all planning, including the housing element requirements you'll hear more about later. Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing, AFFH, means taking meaningful action that addresses significant disparities in housing needs and access to opportunities, replacing segregated living patterns with truly integrated and balanced patterns, transforming racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty into areas of opportunity, and fostering and maintaining compliance with civil rights and fair housing laws. Anne will now cover some of the many things that affect affordability.
Thank you, Mary. So let's talk a little bit about what are the factors that are defined as affordability. And we'll start with income. What leads to something being labeled affordable or not affordable? Federal and state governments define affordability starting with income. The nuances of defining affordable housing include funding regulations. The federal government, through the Department of Housing and Urban Development, known as HUD, defines housing as affordable when it consumes no more than 30% of a household's income, including utilities. Using census data, HUD calculates the national federal poverty level for a family of 4, informed by the Consumer Price Index. In 2025, the federal poverty level was set at $32,150 per year for a 4-person household. From that, HUD creates income measures for specific geographic areas like San Diego County, called the Area Median Income, the AMI. The latest Area Median Income, or AMI, number for San Diego in 2025 was $130,800 for a household of 4 people. It is the median number, the midpoint where half of households in the area earn more and half earn less. The 4-person household calculation for AMI is adjusted depending on the size of a household. As an example, by HUD's calculation, those making less than 80% of the area median income are considered lower-income households. In the San Diego region, about 40% of households are in the very low or low-income category. Lower income includes extremely low-income households, which is 0 to 30% of the AMI, with a maximum income of $34,750 for a 1-person household, or maximum income of $49,600 for a 4-person household. The AMI is a very significant number because it is used locally to determine eligibility for housing assistance according to the income group. This chart shows the maximum income for housing assistance for a 4-person household for the 5 income categories that HUD and the State Department of Housing and Community Development use to determine affordability. Thus, for example, if a 4-person's household is $49,600 or lower, it is an extremely low-income housing. The waiting list for federally funded Section 8 vouchers by qualified recipients is about 15 years long at this point. At this time, the number of landlords that will accept Section 8 vouchers is small, which makes the chance of finding a place to live limited, and the number of vouchers being issued annually by the federal government is dropping. Incomes are just too low. Incomes for many workers are just too low compared to the cost of housing. Some people think that full-time workers can afford housing, but that's a myth. According to the San Diego Housing Federation, renters need to earn $49.44 per hour to afford the average monthly asking rent of $2,571. Someone earning the minimum wage in San Diego County of about $17 an hour would need 3 full-time jobs to afford the typical apartment. The federal government defines housing as affordable when it consumes no more than 30% of a household's income, including utilities. The next chart shows what an affordable rent would have been in 2025 for various adjusted median income levels by family size and number of bedrooms. Monthly income has grown significantly in the past years, but not as quickly as rents have grown. Another major problem is there simply aren't enough housing units that are accessible to lower income people in San Diego County. This chart is from the California Housing Partnership and is done annually for every county in California. The chart on the left shows a shortfall of over 135,000 affordable units in San Diego County for extremely low and very low income households. The chart on the right shows, unsurprisingly, that as household income goes down, the proportion of cost-burdened households goes up. So 83% of extremely low-income households are paying more than half of their income on housing costs, whereas only 3% of moderate-income households are doing so. For-profit developers generally do not build housing for lower-income households unless required to by inclusionary housing or density bonus regulations, because the rents and home prices that many households can afford are too low to cover the costs of developing and operating newly constructed housing. What does get built by the market are units for above moderate income households, which is over 120% of AMI, about 40% of the region's households, and in some cases, moderate income households, although we do not have a good way to track that. Myles will show this later in his discussion of tracking through California's housing element law. Another factor in declining affordable housing is directly related to a decrease in government money targeting housing. As mentioned, market rate housing developers build higher-end, more expensive units to cover their costs and to maximize their profits. Government funding has a role in the production and preservation of affordable housing. Rental subsidies, including Section 8, have declined precipitously over the past 50 years. The chart on the left shows the steady decline of rental assistance going back to the 1975-85 period. The chart on the right shows the steady decline of federal housing investment relative to the growth of the gross domestic product since 1985. Although the legend shows federal housing assistance in orange, it is not detectable on the chart because housing assistance is in the billions, whereas the GDP is now in the trillions. As the RAND study and many other studies show, regulations by local governments have caused long delays in getting housing built, and the time is money phrase sums up the problem this creates. And now Myles will say more about what is stopping more production of affordable housing.
Thank you, Ann. I'm unable to start my video, though. There. So why doesn't the housing market produce more affordable housing? The affordable housing issue we're addressing today is focused on housing for lower income households. Affordable housing for lower income households is provided using Section 8 vouchers, federal, state, and local subsidy funding, including the low-income housing tax credit, to build new or acquire and rehabilitate existing housing or housing being built using state or local programs such as the density bonus, which is required by state law, inclusionary housing, which we'll explain a little later, or other programs like the City of San Diego's Complete Communities Bonus Program. There are some programs that provide housing for moderate income households, but they produce housing to a lesser degree. More low-income affordable units aren't built because of insufficient funding and subsidies, plus insufficient regulatory incentives and requirements that they be built. The market simply does not and cannot build low-income affordable units on its own, given the way that housing is financed in this country. However, the legislature has passed a number of laws in recent years that do incentivize affordable housing in order to get the benefit of reduced processing time in return for providing a certain number of affordable units. A key step in planning at many levels, the State Department's Department of Finance anticipates changes in population by region and sets goals to plan to meet those needs. These goals are negotiated with metropolitan planning organizations around the state. Ours here in San Diego is SANDAG, representing the 18 cities and unincorporated areas of the county. These plans are called Regional Housing Needs Assessments, or abbreviated as RHNA, and updated on an 8-year cycle. The county and all of the local cities in the county also have a responsibility. They have to update their housing plans called housing elements every 8 years, including showing how they will meet their assigned RHNA goals. The next slide elaborates on this process. So the California Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD, requires that all local governments, cities and counties, plan to meet the housing needs of everyone in their communities. This process starts with HCD determining how much housing at a variety of affordability levels is needed excuse me, for each region in the state. Regional governments develop a methodology to allocate housing to local governments. California's local governments then prepare and adopt their housing elements as part of their general plan, which is also required by the state, to show how the local jurisdiction will meet their local housing needs. HCD requires annual reports from local governments to show the progress being made against the goals. For the San Diego region as a whole, we're doing very well in excuse me, in meeting our above moderate income goal, but we are doing much worse in meeting moderate, low, and very low income unit goals. And this pattern is similar for all 18 jurisdictions in the region. HCD and the Attorney General have been increasingly active in enforcing the housing laws, particularly with respect to whether cities adopt their housing elements in a timely manner. Once adopted, local jurisdictions are expected to make a good faith effort to meet their RENA goals in their housing element plans. Local and county governments use zoning to guide the development of units in their housing elements. The housing element, as I said, is a required element in the general plan. Zoning is a set of detailed land use and development regulations that guide development on individual parcels. It generally divides a jurisdiction into a set of districts or zones that provide for the regulation of the intensity of development expressed as units per acre, users of land, which typically are residential, commercial, industrial, and open space, and also define details, design details such as height, bulk, setbacks, lot coverage, and so forth. Although zoning regulations are generally the purview of local jurisdictions, the state has imposed many specific limitations on the exercise of local zoning power, such as requiring sufficient land for residential use, requiring that accessory dwelling units or ADUs be allowed, requiring that density bonuses for affordable housing be offered, allowing child care facilities as part of residential developments, requiring coastal zone approvals when projects are in the coastal zone, and building compliance with fair housing requirements. Planning has matured over the years, and as a result now, communities now consider what are called high and low resource areas. The next slide shows how these resource areas are categorized and mapped. To foster inclusive communities free from barriers that restrict access to opportunity, the California Department of Housing and Community Development developed mapping tools that are intended to advance the state's affirmatively fair housing, otherwise known as AFFH. The League of Women Voters joins all levels of California government in stating that affordable housing should be available in all communities with access to education, jobs, infrastructure, and services. The effects of historic racial and income segregation through zoning still exist, though. The opportunity map identifies areas in every region of the state whose characteristics have been shown by research to be associated with positive economic, educational, and health outcomes for low-income families, particularly low-income outcomes for long-term outcomes for children. As such, the map is intended to inform efforts to advance the AFFH objective of increasing access to opportunity. So on this particular map, for San Diego County, the high resource areas primarily tend to be in the northern part of the region, while the lower resource areas tend to be in the southern part, although there are exceptions. This is a problem because it concentrates low and moderate income housing in areas that are already demographically considered low and moderate income with few job opportunities, reinforcing patterns of racial, ethnic, and economic segregation. So let's talk about funding, which is another key step in using multifamily housing as an example. So just as a home buyer might prepare to buy a first home, developers aiming to build multifamily rental housing generally need to borrow money to get started. A down payment is made and the buyer arranges to borrow the rest from a bank. For a multifamily rental housing developer, the down payment is called equity, paid by investors who put money into the project. The rest of the costs are covered by a loan. Like a home mortgage, the loan can be fixed or adjustable with terms lasting as long as 35 years. For market rate rental property, equity, which is the value of the property less the debt, covers the total development costs of the property, including land and construction costs of new or renovation of existing units. A property that charges lower rents generates less rental income and can't have as much debt and operating costs as a property that charges higher rents. Like a home, rental housing has a second major type of cost called operating costs, such as insurance, property taxes, and maintenance. Multifamily rental housing operators have all of these costs, plus others like property management, security, administrative expenses, and marketing. Owners of multifamily rental properties pay for financing and operating costs using the income from rents. To build affordable housing for lower-income households, a gap exists between the funding needed to develop and operate a property and the revenue that the property produces, which is income from rents. To create an affordable multifamily rental property, this funding gap needs to be filled. So how is the affordable housing gap filled? To fill the gap, developers need help in the form of a subsidy. The subsidy most often comes from local, state, or the federal government, but it can also come from other sources. The subsidy can be used to help cover construction costs, rents, or operating costs. Assistance with construction costs reduces the amount that the developer needs to borrow. Developers of affordable housing often assemble many sources of subsidies to help fill the affordable housing funding gap. Construction subsidies, most often in the form of a federal program called the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit, are the most common. Others include mortgages with below-market interest rates, tax-exempt bonds, local bond funds, state tax credits, federal grants or loans from programs like the Federal Home Block Grant Program that provides funding to states and eligible localities to be used for affordable housing activities to benefit low-income households, investment partnerships programs, local grants, land donations, contributions from charitable foundations, or deferred developer fees. Once sufficient sources of funding are identified to create the housing, additional subsidies may be required to pay for the cost of operations, such as rent subsidies for tenants. Developers generally try to use the minimum number of subsidies, the minimum number of subsidy sources possible, because each additional source of subsidy makes funding more complex and more time consuming. However, to reach the lowest income families with the greatest needs, it may require multiple subsidy sources to be cobbled together to make the project financially feasible. A project is not feasible unless it covers 100% of its funding gap. So every source of funding matters. And now Mary will look at how all of this comes together in actually building affordable housing.
Thank you, Myles. For our purposes in telling the story of affordable housing, there are two types: units being built by developers and existing older units. The first type consists of dedicated units that are set aside for low or moderate income households. These are created by developers using assistance from public sources or through affordability requirements or incentives granted by local governments. The second type are called naturally occurring affordable housing, NOAH, which are not deed restricted and without any state or local subsidy or voucher. In the past, the federal government was the sole funder of construction of many affordable housing developments. Today, dedicated affordable housing is usually created using subsidies from multiple sources, as Myles described. Other dedicated affordable units are created as a result of affordability incentives or requirements established by local or state governments, the density bonus law, or local inclusionary housing requirements. These units may be built by for-profit developers who don't ordinarily focus on affordable housing, but are willing to do so in order to get their projects approved. For example, a city may require that a share of the units in a new market rate development over a certain size be affordable, the inclusionary requirement. Or a city may offer incentives, such as the ability to build at higher density for developments that include affordable housing. Dedicated affordable housing units have legally binding restrictions on who can live in the housing and how long it must remain affordable to a specific income group. These units may continue to serve lower income households for as long as 30 or 50 years or more. Here are some examples of local requirements, some with incentives to encourage development of affordable units. Inclusionary requirements may specify that the units be on the same site as the project or off-site at a nearby location. State law requires that cities offering an alternative to providing affordable units on site. Typically, this requirement is met by allowing developers to pay an in lieu fee. State density bonus law requires local jurisdictions to offer bonuses for development of additional housing for projects that include affordable units, including development where all housing is deed restricted. A good example of this is the City of San Diego's Density Bonus Program. In San Diego, most affordable housing produced between 2021 and 2024 was permitted through the Density Bonus Program. It created the most homes for low and very low income households and made up over 80% of affordable homes in high resource areas across all programs. In 2024, just over 2,600 new homes were permitted using the Density Bonus Program. Between 2021 and 2024, almost 3,400 new homes were permitted using the Density Bonus Program. Naturally occurring affordable housing, known as NOAH, is housing that's affordable without any government subsidy. Often these are older homes, usually apartment buildings, whose rents have become affordable over time as newer properties have come online, but they do not have legally binding affordability requirements. As rental prices continue to rise, the number of available rental homes for moderate and low-income renters continues to decline. NOAA properties are especially at risk as there are no affordability covenants that limit the amount of rent that an owner can charge. Also, these units are often torn down and replaced by new, higher-end luxury housing. Here, government subsidies or enforced restrictions can help preserve affordability and avoid displacement. This slide shows some local and state laws which can provide incentives to preserve existing affordable housing. For example, taking credit for preserved units when sold and rent restricted, in tabulating RHNA goals, and so on. Earlier, we identified the 5 Ps of affordable housing. While our focus has been on producing and preserving affordable housing, the other 3 Ps are important: protecting tenants, preventing displacement, and promoting equity in inclusion and sustainability. Policy and process changes can help keep the cost down on deed-restricted affordable housing. For example, the RAND study cited positive effects of accelerating the time to approve housing developments by local jurisdictions. By doing so, it estimated California could reduce the average 15-month gap in pre-development time, thereby reducing production costs. Of course, there are trade-offs, which could involve basic values that Californians hold dear. For example, should environmental reviews be further reduced? Should high mandated wages on construction projects be reduced? Should prescriptive but costly design requirements be reduced? These could involve difficult choices which must be balanced against one another. Many of these choices would need to be made at the state level. These choices and remedies to fix the problem exist against a larger backdrop. There are 2 competing theories of housing. One is that if you're a property owner, developer, or bank, you want housing values to rise to continue to be financed. If you're an advocate for affordable housing, you want values to go down to make housing available for a broader segment of the population. This is the basic conflict given our current method of financing capital needed for housing in this country. To be clear, at the very lowest income or poverty levels, subsidies may always be necessary. However, to create housing for lower income households requires comprehensive strategies that go beyond a reliance on the marketplace. Part of any strategy should be ensuring that new affordable housing can be built quickly and efficiently, and strengthening preservation and rental assistance programs. And showed us that the region's area median income of $130,800 leaves many in our population behind. Myles called our attention to progress toward RHNA goals from 2021 to 2029. Except for above moderate income units, progress achieved towards goals is low. About 15% for moderate units, 18% for low income units, and 8% for very low income units. These measurements suggest we must focus on affordable housing units that can be built quickly and efficiently, as well as strengthening preservation and rental assistance. This slide shows some of the changes to be considered. Pursue local and state funding mechanisms to leverage other public and private funding sources. Incentivize diverse housing types and new affordable developments that serve very low and extremely low income families. Invest in and provide financial access to collective ownership models, such as social housing and community land trusts. Preserve existing affordable housing. Increase resources for local, state, and federal rental assistance. Rethinking how truly affordable housing gets financed and built is needed. In this presentation, we have looked at the major components related to affordability, why more units at an affordable level aren't produced, how those that are produced came to be. The supply of above moderate income housing is not a problem in San Diego or most cities. We are producing sufficient above moderate income market rate housing, and maybe even a fair amount of moderate income housing. Our housing challenge lies in the need for more affordable housing for lower income households. This will require more government subsidies and stronger regulatory incentives and requirements. More needs to be done to show truly meaningful results. As we hope we've demonstrated tonight, more needs to be done to increase affordability. In the past decades, the federal government has significantly decreased its financial commitment to housing. If basic housing is a human right, as the League believes, then the role of government in helping to accomplish that goal is undeniable. The League's voice in local housing policy decisions and the State League's voice in California housing policy can have an effect. We welcome you to join us in shaping local policy. Please visit our webpage. And now, Jane, over to you.
Okay. Mary, do you want to stop sharing your screen just so everybody can see faces? Great. Thank you. So thank you very much. We have a few questions in the Q&A, but I'm hoping that we will get some more. I have a bunch of my own, so maybe we'll start out with one of mine. I wanted to ask if there are ways that other countries are doing better with providing housing, low-income housing, than we are, and that you, the three of you, I think are working well. How can we learn from what other countries are doing?
Well, Vienna, Austria is really doing a great job with what's called social housing, and we're trying to learn from them right now. HCD is doing a study of social housing in California to see how it might work here. Portland, Oregon is doing the same thing. And social housing was one of the collective forms of housing that we suggested be explored. So that is something that we should learn more about.
Can you just give a little more of a snapshot as to how it gets developed,
Well, it's similar to public housing as we know it, but it includes both private and public together. And we in the United States have been doing more mixed income developments with a moderate and above moderate households living in the same development or the same community as low income. This is applying it on a little bit bigger scale, though.
Okay.
I'd like to mention Finland. I think Finland deserves a prize. This country has no homeless. They have deliberately created very small apartments throughout the community so that anyone who is homeless is placed in a very basic, simple apartment that has a small kitchen, a bathroom, a bedroom, and that's it. But it keeps them out of the cold. And they have no homeless now in Finland. I think that's something that we would like to strive for in our country, but we're not making much progress at this point.
Okay. Wendy.
So there's a mathematical question that was asked. Is there an additive number? We're talking, the question is as relates to the AMI, the median income. Is there an additive number? Because the template or it's set up for a household of 4. How is it adjusted for households of 5 or 6, for instance?
I think that's exactly what happens. I don't know what the additive number is, but the more people in the household, the more crowded it is, then you get a little bit more money per person. I can't give you the exact number.
Okay, thank you.
There is a chart, though, that the Housing Commission has and every county has that applies the median income for a four-person household, adjusted upward or downward for family size, and I believe it goes up to 8.
I think so too.
Yeah, and it goes down to as low as a one-person household.
Okay, I have a tough question for you all. Um, as you know, we have quite a few seats that are up for election this year locally. And I wanted to know what kinds of questions we should be asking candidates about their approaches to housing. You know, I realize there's the local, there's the state, and obviously the federal, but what are the key questions about local policies on housing right now for candidates, for example, for city council?
Good question.
I said it would be tough.
Well, but I guess I would jump in and say that, local policies are made locally. We all must adhere to the state policies, but local policies are the kinds of policies where we're maybe in compliance with state density bonus laws, state inclusionary ordinances, but apply them is the point. And, some of the cities throughout the North County, most have adopted an inclusionary ordinance, but not all. And that is, it's on the books. And it is one of the things that we can see is it would enforce affordable units in a project. And so the laws are there and the jurisdictions should use them.
Yeah. I would suggest that the first thing you ask is, what would you, as a council member or whatever, what would you do to encourage more affordable housing? And ask for a specific, detailed answer, not a, oh, I'm in favor. That won't cut it. Exactly how would you contribute toward more affordable housing in your jurisdiction should you be elected? That's the first question.
And also, I think another thing to be considered, how would they achieve the affirmatively furthering fair housing objectives, particularly with respect to trying to generate more affordable housing in the higher resource areas, and that's hard to do.
Right.
But as we showed, that really needs to be an emphasis. And another thing that occurs to me is that San Diego used to have a lot of single room occupancy units called SROs. They used to be downtown. Most of those have been lost now. How can we bring those back in a meaningful way? And that would do a lot to alleviate the homeless problem that we have now.
Mhm. I'd jump on to Myles' answer about the the low and high opportunity areas. You saw it on the map. It's all mapped out for us where needs are. A lot of those opportunities come through infrastructure investment. Whether it be parks and schools and good water systems at work and sewage systems at work. So that's investment, and that can be local investment. They can go and try and leverage state and maybe even federal funding to make that kind of investment. But that is almost like a precursor to the kind of opportunities that we want our communities to have.
The next question really talks about what incentives might work for the developer side that are not government based.
You mean like public opinion?
Well, let me add a twist to this because you've kind of alluded to this. It's not in this person's question. There's data that says that if people of lower resources are in a higher resourced housing area, and I'm thinking specifically of kids, that those kids do perform better.
Exactly.
So how, this is a slightly political charged angle to this question. How to incentivize people to do that versus making their affordable units down in the flood zones.
Yeah.
Well, for one thing, the city of San Diego entered into a settlement with a group of homeowners in southeastern San Diego last year. And that settlement provides that 70% of future affordable housing through 2028 be located in higher resource areas. Um, so we need to be monitoring that closely to see the extent to which they're actually able to do that. And as Mary said, it relates also to the provision of infrastructure. And now the city of San Diego is prioritizing where their developer fee money goes to lower resource areas and areas where affordable housing will be located.
You asked about non-governmental incentives, and I suspect that, as Mary has indicated, the community itself, I think, has to express a willingness and a welcoming attitude. That frequently doesn't happen with large developments nowadays in many communities, but that certainly would be one way to attract new buildings if the community actually showed that it cared about the less affluent people in its community.
Okay. I'm going to try to frame this question. It's a big picture one, but is our housing affordability crisis a direct outcome of this K-shaped economy we have here in the US, where there's a massive wealth gap, and it's also tied to assets rather than wages, so that wage-dependent workers, the lower arm of the K-shape, see their home buying power just obliterated by luxury costs, inflation, and borrowing costs. Do you have any comment on that aspect of our?
We sort of alluded to that a bit, Jane, in this idea about this conflict about, wealth accumulation. It's usually in the form of homes. And that in order to keep that wealth going up, those home values need to go up. So there's a sort of a perverse dilemma here that we need these lower affordable units, but there's this wealth that wants to keep building. And so the thinking that we've come to in these remarks we shared tonight was that it needs to be recognized and addressed that there's this conflict of where to get the capital to build the low income units when the capital is wealth accumulating. And so this it's something we need to put our brains to and think about. But it is a way to think about it, that it's this wealth accumulation and the cost of capital needed to go build these lower end units. That's the tension.
I'd also like to point out another factor I think that goes into this. The K-shaped economy is a relatively new phenomenon, but as we pointed out in the presentation, the drop in Section 8 subsidies started in the late 70s and early 80s under the Reagan administration. And Section 8 subsidies have dropped precipitously since then. And it's continued regardless of whether it's been a Democratic administration or a Republican administration in charge. And it's been exacerbated by the wealth gap. So now we do have as we know, an extraordinary wealth gap in the United States, and that is contributing to the rise in housing prices, particularly at the above moderate income level, and it doesn't filter down to the lower income levels.
Yeah.
This is referencing the single room occupancy issue that you addressed earlier. And the abbreviation is SROs. As a healthcare provider, some of my clients lived in SROs. They didn't have the best reputations, by the way, those buildings. But one of our listeners has actually asked what happened to those.
They were demolished as part of redevelopment downtown.
Downtown San Diego. All those lovely posh new hotels and restaurants and things.
Okay, that's a clear answer. Jane, next question.
Okay. Could one or all of you comment on what impact any changes in funding from the federal government are having on housing and affordable housing?
Anne is the expert on this.
Well, I'm saying, considering that we have had total chaos in this country, not knowing what kind of funding would come to any program, it seems that we are now at the point where Congress has reached a budget that did not have the drastic cuts that we were anticipating. There are parts of the social welfare sections of the government's money to us that have been decreased slightly. I don't know of any that have been increased. So that doesn't bode well for reaching out to the people who are newly becoming unhoused and in need of affordable housing, much less help those who can't find a place to live, because the Section 8 vouchers, which help them find a rental, are rare, and they're not that rare, really, but they're not that useful. I know people who have had them who have not ever been able to find an apartment to use them with because the landlord didn't want to go through the process or whatever. There was nothing available. Does that help?
Yes, yes.
So I'm remembering that our joint league event of about a year and a half ago was about housing. And someone asked a question where the speakers there were talking about their experience in doing this. The question was, could local governments work more closely with nonprofits interested in building affordable housing?
No question.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things we cited as a promising thing to look at is the idea of land trusts. That sounds pretty, esoteric, but land trusts are really land that is donated or made available that then can have affordable housing built on it, and forever that land will not be a factor in, the value of it going sky high. And so when you think of somebody has land available, grouping together and forming land trusts and making land available, it's a really powerful local energy idea.
Would you explain how that happens? Because I hear this, but how does it get formed? Who forms it?
Well, all across the country, I'm aware of, there's all sorts of land trusts that donate a piece of forest land. It's part of a bequest, and then it's becomes a trust, and then the however that trust is organized would say the use can be this or that, and so it would be a formation that would have to happen. But this is people power coming together, or people who have these kinds of assets. They'd have to sort of be contiguous, but just conceive of that happening,
Mary,
rather than as Go ahead.
Remember the YIGBY, the law that was passed last year? There are several YIGBY projects. That's yes, in God's backyard. Churches and schools now in California have the ability to have affordable housing built on their property. And many churches, which are dwindling because their membership, for whatever reason, is becoming smaller, are considering very carefully, and some schools are actually talking about building affordable housing on land. San Diego Unified School District is a good example. You know, I think that the creativity that's needed um, is out there. It's a question of the motivation to do it. But some of the churches are considering it, and we actually talked to Mary. What was the name of the group?
I want to say it's loosely affiliated with interfaith, but I'm not sure.
It's
But there's
interfaith
one church
community
down in
service.
South County where it's actually there. They've done it.
Yes, they've actually got one going where a church has actually donated land and will then receive rental eventually, because that's one of those packages that are put together by, some government funds and some private funds and an investment, and it all works out, but it takes time. And that's I think really hopeful.
There is a community land trust that's been operating for a number of years in San Diego in the Otay Mesa Nestor community near the international border. And the Linda Vista Community Planning Group has expressed interest in trying to encourage the formation of a community land trust.
Okay, here's an enforcement question for you all. In the questioner's experience, the teeth emphasized for enforcement and penalties by the state have improved, but still see so much non-compliance. What strategies do you suggest to improve enforcement and sharpen HCD's teeth?
Well, the Attorney General has been very aggressive about going after those jurisdictions that have not adopted their housing elements in a timely manner. There's also something called the builder's remedy available, which is another state law that says essentially that if a jurisdiction has not adopted its housing element by the required date, then a developer has the right to go in and build his project without having to get approval from the local jurisdiction. So as you can imagine, it's been controversial, and there was legislation that the state legislature passed last year to clarify exactly how the builder's remedy would work. So that is a significant tool that's out there. Also, there's a provision that says that the state can deny transportation and housing funding to jurisdictions that have not adopted their housing elements.
The threat of maintaining of not forwarding to the cities federal and state money, I think is probably the biggest hammer out there. But I don't know how often it's used by the Department of Housing and Community Development.
Myles, when you were first answering, you made reference to a builder's something, state
Builder's remedy.
Builder's remedy.
Remedy. Okay, and that's the terminology.
Right.
And then the other was you mentioned a recent state law. Do you have any number or title to that? Is there? And actually, I'll let me jump in because I did have another question, which is what is the state doing well in its legislation and policies? Because there have been every year some new, it seems to me, new bills. Which ones do you all think are working or
Well,
beginning to work?
the state legislature has adopted many new housing laws in the last few years. One of them, in particular, that occurs to me, allows um, developers to build in underutilized commercial districts. We have a lot of underutilized shopping districts now, or abandoned shopping districts. Many of those could be converted to housing now. So the legislature passed a law a few years ago that says, okay, Mr. Developer, you can do that, and we'll make it easier for you to redevelop it residentially if you agree to provide a certain number of units in the complex as affordable. And if you do that, you get what's called ministerial processing, which means by right, there's no hearings, no planning commission review, no city council review. It's approved purely at the staff level, so it makes it much easier to get this project through. So that's an example, I think, of something that the legislature has done to facilitate affordable housing. But there are many others. They've made it easier, much easier to do ADUs. And as you know, that's been controversial in San Diego, but the city council recently pulled back part of some of the controversial elements of the ADU program. So it may be operating less controversially now. And they've done a number of other things. The big emphasis has been to try to get as many units in the pipeline as they can, uh, particularly incentivizing affordable and making it easier to process those to get their permits using the by right approval process.
Another thing that's happening is the cities and the state are working on making factory-built housing much more easy to do, and that, I mean, that potentially can make a huge difference because of the cost. So I think the state gets a lot of credit for that, but they've been trying, they've been chipping away at at housing problems, but I don't know that there is an overall brilliant guiding strategy, truthfully. Does anybody else think there is?
It's a tough nut
I
to
guess
crack.
not.
Throw a lot of spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks, you know?
It feels like that sometimes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well, the state legislature has passed so many housing laws to encourage more housing production, particularly at the affordable end, that it's created some resentment on the part of some local jurisdictions who feel that they've gone too far and that there's been a loss of local control with respect to land use and zoning. So there's now an effort to try to qualify a ballot initiative for the state ballot. I believe they're aiming for 2028.
Yeah.
That would um, suspend or nullify many of these laws that have been passed and try to restore local control. And many of the North County coastal cities are playing a lead role in this.
Oh, tell me all about it, Miles. I live in one of those cities.
You know that, yes.
I know that only too well.
So there's a question here that again is, well, I'll try to sort of rephrase it, but it is that, you know, the cost of a two-bedroom house in Southern California is outrageous. Um, is there any way that will ever get lowered? Is there any hope for a lowering of the cost, you know,
There
of
are. There
There's a
are.
lot of dire predictions that say it's going to be decades until it naturally happens. I mean, barring some horrible financial crisis, which we, of course, don't want. But it's, there's the market right now has kind of given us what we've gotten. And so it's going to take a long time to that naturally get back to, the level we might all think, well, that's what we're used to. But then, Jane, you said earlier, we've all touched on it, the income inequality that is such a factor, that, you know, the inflationary factors, income inequality, it puts this out of reach. And so people move out of state. They think, but it's happening all over the country. If you're watching this throughout the country, um, California just happened to be the first. But it's, this kind of affordability problems, especially if you're home buying, it's, the down payments and all of that. And you see people nibbling away on it. Let's have a 50-year mortgage, or let's, all these little nibbly ideas at going after the problem. But it's bigger.
I would agree with that. And I think not enough attention has been given to the role that the wealth gap has played in fueling price appreciation for the high-end units. And that, we're all paying a price for that.
You all need to look at the video of the last SEAC meeting that the San Diego League had. The speaker was Rachel Hassenstam, and she talked about the whole idea of the economics of post-growth. It's an idea that I had not come across before, but I think it explains a lot of what's going on in our economy. And if we don't set it right, many people will be having to make some very serious decisions about where they can afford to live. Jane, that's an opportunity to advertise that video.
yes, yes. And Rachel is one of the questioners here. So
Well, I figured she was. I thought I recognized a couple.
yeah, I see it. Wendy, do you see one? Or I see one. Okay. Um, so there is a question about those who aren't facing homelessness, but have affordability issues such as teachers and first responders. And the questioner raises, do any of our cities consider this when planning housing? And I do know that San Diego Unified has had a recent project along those lines, but any general commentary about, those who are our core workers?
I'll also say, just generically, I mean, for many, as long as you can remember, there were company towns that provided housing and everything for their workers. So I'm not saying that that's in our future, but the concept of providing housing for your workers as almost either part of a benefits package or an incentive to join a company or an organization, it's a pretty, nowadays, it's a pretty attractive thought. So I think we're probably going to see more of it, and I'm so proud of San Diego Unified for stepping out there on this.
So you're in support of that. And are there other cities or in the county that where there's some similar efforts to provide housing for staff?
Not that I
I've heard
know
of
of.
it. Yeah.
Not that I know of.
Because we want to applaud the creative efforts.
Yes. Well, and you have to think about it. I mean, if you're earning $17 an hour and you and your spouse are working and you have two children, you're in an almost impossible situation if you don't have family to help you with childcare, if you have to go a long ways to get to your job. Um, and I don't think it's surprising that the number of people losing shelter and becoming unhoused is starting to grow again because we're going through this period where it seems like it gets better and then it gets a little worse and then it gets a little worse and then a little better. I just don't really know. I feel very sorry for people who are facing a situation where there's no choice, no choices of decent, affordable housing. They have to live in rundown places. Dare I say it, with old rotten things that don't work very well, like the plumbing or the carpeting or whatever. It's just not designed. I've got through reading this book recently, and it's really on my mind. And I could recommend it to everybody. It's called There Is No Place for Us. And it is about the people who cannot get the money together to even make whatever you call it when you rent an apartment. What's that called?
Deposit. A
Thank you.
deposit.
A deposit. So they are living in their cars, they're living in motels where the facilities are something less than desirable. The title says it all. There is no place for them. They don't have enough money to do what they want to do. They have families. I don't know. I could get grumpy about it all.
One of the things that I've noticed in the last few years is that there's more emphasis now on trying to locate affordable housing near job opportunities.
Mm.
And that is moving away from the traditional emphasis of zoning on separation, which was based on separation of use, which means residential would be in one location, commercial and industrial areas in another location. Now we're thinking in terms of integrating those kinds of uses much more closely than we have in the past. And affordable housing is part of that equation. And it's really important to be thinking in terms of locating affordable housing in proximity to job opportunities. And that relates directly to what we were talking about earlier with respect to the resource areas map.
Okay, well, we've asked you a lot of questions. We haven't covered every single one. There are quite a few which were more about kind of income support. And I wanted to keep us a little more focused on the housing side of it, but they're obviously intertwined too. So I just want to thank you for your expertise, your experience, your insights, and not to mention just your hard work and gathering all this complicated information together in a way that's digestible. I gather there will be a report that will be available at some point, potentially. Are there any further comments by any of our presenters or reflections?
Actually, we're planning to have the slides available on the websites and of course the video. And we have we have a glossary that sort of is an addendum to this program. And of course, our housing action policy, all of that is on the H&H webpage, which there's a link in the chat to that. So right now, we hadn't contemplated an actual written report. Those resources that I named would be it.
Yeah. Well, that's great. And you all are a resource and will be ongoing. So thank you very much. And thanks to all the participants. There have been many kudos to you in the Q&A. They weren't questions, but they were kudos. So I'll pass that along.
I would also like to publicly acknowledge the great job that Mary did in putting this. She took the lead in putting this presentation together. She did a tremendous job of everything. Now, we all contributed to it significantly, but Mary was really the one who led the charge in putting this presentation together, and she did a tremendous job.
She
Thank you,
did.
Myles.
Thank you.
Well,
I'm
well,
expressing
thank you.
the
Well,
thanks of the audience.
all right. While we're
you.
at it, I want to thank our question sorters. I think that's the really harder job. And you guys did a great job of feeding us answerable questions.
All right. Well, thank you all, and good night to one and all.
Good night.
Good night.
Weeks, please.